Caribbean households, we don't talk about it. Firstborn American, right? And my friends and the people around me, they're talking about all these things. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You did what and how and what? And I'm like so confused, right? We do not have sound education or sex education anywhere in our country. I think it's getting worse. But this topic in general, because it's so new, right? Sexual education started in the 50s and 60s, Masters and Johnson. So it was done with the assumption that men and women operate in the same way. And it's really not, and not until the last couple of decades, really, that women are stepping into research. So we are learning the distinct differences, similarities and differences. It's very typical for one partner to maybe have a higher sex drive than the other. And then it feels like we're incompatible, but it's not about incompatibility. It's about just getting to know and understand your sexual self and how you operate.
Oh my gosh, guys, hold on to your seats, okay? Because if you're like me and grew up in a Caribbean household, this was a topic you didn't talk about, okay? Correct. You did not dare mention this topic, but we're talking all about it today. And we've got Rachel Smith joining us, and she doesn't hold back. She's going to be sharing all the things and even some things that we need to know even more about.
Yeah,
so
Rachel,
so excited to have you here.
It is such a pleasure to thank you so much for having me. Anytime anybody asks me to come and have these conversations, I'm like, I'm there, because we don't have them enough. And that's a part of our challenge in our relationships.
Exactly. So please share with everyone what it is that you do and you specialize in.
Okay. So my name is Rachel Smith. I'm the founder of Infinite Intimacy. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified sex therapist. So I help women and couples reconnect with themselves, reconnect with each other in a more deep and meaningful way.
So good. So good. Who doesn't want to know how to rekindle and to just connect in a better way? Yeah. So Rachel, please tell me, how did you get started in this field of study? Especially, I know just like me, you are Jamaican.
Yes.
So, it can be pretty taboo of a conversation.
Exactly.
You were bold enough to pursue it.
I know. I don't think my parents were ready. When I told them, they're like, what are you doing? First of all, you're a therapist. What? And now you're a sex therapist. What is that? What does that
just
mean?
Be a doctor.
I know. I thought you were going to be a pediatrician. No. I want to talk about sex because we don't talk about it. And so I found myself in a space, Caribbean households, we don't talk about it, right? And so and I'm also the oldest child and firstborn American, right? So especially going through high school and my friends and the people around me, they're talking about all these things. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You did what and how and what? And I'm like so confused, right? And I'm I guess, naturally curious person. So I just found myself asking a lot of questions, but then it was like the blind leading the blind, because we do not have sound education or sex education really anywhere in our country, I think. And it's getting worse, but we're here to try to shift that narrative and kind of shift out of the stigma. So, I found myself in a space of, well, if I don't know and they don't really know, they're just kind of going based off of their experiences, then I'm like, I need to educate myself. And so I kind of took myself down that path.
So good. Like, do you know how many of us thought the same thing, but we did not pursue saying, let me help others understand, because I didn't understand, but I'm so glad you did, because we need more like you to help us.
Thank you.
We need that. So when you went to go study, was it to go study in?
So relationships for me, I think, are just, the mind is so fascinating, right? So undergrad psychology and really understanding kind of the inner workings. And to me, that was fascinating. And then when you add in relationship dynamics, that within itself is just so interesting, right? For me, at least. And so then when I realized, I was a part of the psychological society in undergrad, and every meeting we had a different specialist, different type of psychologist kind of come in and talk to us about their specialty. And we had a sex therapist come in, and he started sharing all kinds of stories. And I'm like, what? You do what? You talk to people about what? Your clients did what? And so then he said, one thing about my work is that I'm never bored. And that just spoke to my soul. I'm a Sag. And so I'm always like, on to the next thing, bigger and better. And let's go, let's go, let's go. And so for me, I know I get bored easily. And when he said I'm never bored, and just this topic in general, because it's so new, right? Sexual education really started in the 50s and 60s, Masters and Johnson. And then it was done from a male lens. So it was done with the assumption that men and women operate in the same way. And it's really not, and not until the last couple of decades, really, that women are stepping into research. So we are learning the distinct differences, similarities and differences between our minds and our bodies and how we operate, right? How we function sexually. And so it's so important. Nobody knows. And so we're here left feeling like, what's wrong with me? Am I broken? That's probably one of the number one things that my clients come to me with. They're like, am I normal? Is there something wrong with me? I feel like I'm broken. And then once we go through just the educational piece of it, they leave that first session like, oh, you know what? I feel more hopeful. I feel like, I actually have a direction that we can move in. And so it's just the most heartwarming work and exciting and fun. And I mean, sometimes it can get really tough and difficult because there's so much guilt and shame that's also surrounding this part of ourselves that we got to really work through that. But once we get to that other side, the sky's the limit.
So good. Shame is like a really big part of that. And it's so funny because sex is a natural thing for us to participate in. That's what we need to be doing. So how is it that we were the least educated on the most natural part of who we are as people?
Exactly. I mean, for the most part, right? I mean, technology is wonderful, but if it wasn't for sex, we really wouldn't be here.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. So Rachel.
Yes.
The first time I met Rachel, she did a talk and I was like, oh, I love her. This is so good. What are some of the top things that you find as challenges? Like you mentioned, the shame, that you have to walk people through it first. And then the education. I see you have some things that you're going to share with us to educate us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the number one challenge that gets presented to me is what we call desire discrepancy. So different levels of desire between partners, right? And so it's very typical for one partner to maybe have a higher sex drive than the other. And then it feels like we're incompatible, but it's not about incompatibility. It's about just getting to know and understand your sexual self and how you operate so that we can work to accommodate for both partners rather than getting in this tug of war. Well, I'm not doing this because you're not doing that, right? We really have to understand what's going on in my mind, in my body, and how that's impacting my ability or inability to show up sexually.
Oh, that is so good. Yes. That is like a key reason to go visit Rachel tomorrow, because a lot of times that is one of the biggest things is, you feel like, you should be on someone else's level of desire when it's just you are who you are.
Exactly. Exactly. Our wiring is different. So if we understand that, then we can work with it versus feeling like it's working against us.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I keep eyeing this display here.
My things, my toys.
I want you to walk us through what toys you have here and just educate us.
Okay. Yes. So this is really the fundamental piece of it, right? When we talk about getting our spark back, there's three fundamental things that we need to take into consideration. One, how are we defining sex? What does sex mean to you? Because that definition can be different for everybody, right? And unfortunately, in our society, when we hear the word intimacy, we automatically equate that with what? Sex.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking. I was like, is the answer sex? Because that's what I'm thinking.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, that's what it is, right? We hear intimacy, we automatically equate that with sex. We hear the word sex, we automatically equate that with intercourse. We think about intercourse and we think that it has to end in an orgasm, right? So when we think about it in that very linear way, it's kind of rigid, right?
Yeah.
Because we're actually pigeonholing ourselves and only giving ourselves one way to be sexual and intimate. intimate, right? So it's kind of like we're putting all of our eggs in one basket, but then God forbid somebody like stumbles a little bit, or we're going through a season where, maybe it's a little bit of a drought, and then everything starts to deteriorate and we feel like, we're completely disconnected and now we're crumbling. Right. And so if we're really only giving ourselves one way to be sexual and intimate, then we're doing ourselves a disservice. So much of my work is learning how to zoom out, right? Recognizing that I can have a pleasurable and connecting sexual experience with my partner without having an orgasm, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the pleasure and connection is still there. And I can be sexual in so many ways that doesn't include intercourse. And then when I think about intimacy, I think about a meaningful connection, right? And from that standpoint, we can experience a meaningful connection in so many ways with our partners that doesn't include sex, right? And so when we're able to really expand our perspective and our experience of what sex and intimacy is, then it gives us really infinite possibilities to connect with our partners.
That is so good.
Yeah. So that's really the first part, right? When we think about how are we defining and being open to redefining what sex means, right? So we give ourselves more options. And then we have to understand what drives sexuality in general. Yeah. And then the most important thing is to understand what drives us personally, right? So those are the different fundamental parts. It's like, what are we hearing in our society? What are all the messages that we've received, right? What are all the beliefs that I've come to kind of gather along the way, whether it's through our culture or through our society or through our religion or through our families or through our ex-partners, right? That have told us certain things about ourselves. And so we just believe it rather than exploring for ourselves, right? And so when we think about sexuality, it's this part of ourselves is really fundamentally different than any other part of ourselves. And so when we think about, okay, who am I and how am I showing up? The way that I'm showing up in my everyday life might be very different than the way that I want and love to show up sexually. So it's allowing ourselves to kind of like create space for this other kind of being to come alive because we've been kind of suppressing it for so long, right? So when we think about the education, what does this look like to you, Michelle?
Looks like a little turtle.
It looks like, I love it. It looks like it does. The color. Yeah. Little ninja turtle over here. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So this is the vulva. The vulva is everything that we can see. Okay. We typically refer to everything down there as the vagina, but we are literally disregarding the most important part of our pleasure, right? So when we think about the vulva, it's everything that we can see. It's the outer lips, labia, inner lips, inner labia, and our clitoris, our pleasure center. So our clitoris has 10,000 nerve endings. It is the only sexual organ that's not meant for reproduction. It is purely there for our pleasure.
Wow.
Right. So the vagina refers to the vaginal canal. And if we're referring to everything as the vagina, then we're disregarding completely, not even paying attention to our pleasure.
Oh my gosh.
So a lot of people also don't know the full structure of the clitoris. Right? She's like, where'd you pull that from? Yes. So if this is the vaginal canal through here, right? The clitoris actually wraps around the vaginal canal.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's why intercourse can be pleasurable for women. But the reality is only about 20% of women are able to achieve an orgasm through penetration alone. Right. The majority of women, about 80% of women, need direct clitoral stimulation in order to achieve an orgasm.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that, Michelle. So when we're thinking about the full structure of the clitoris, and this is my little golden clitoris here that I love to use. And then this is just a smaller version of the vulva. And then you can kind of see how it wraps around.
Oh, that is so cool.
How the clitoris wraps around, right? So when we think about the clitoris, the full structure of the clitoris was found in the late 90s and first published in the early 2000s.
Are you kidding me?
Exactly.
Wait a minute. So
Yeah.
we were in the Stone Age until like
Yeah.
the late 90s. Are you serious?
Yeah. Well, actually, if we go far, far back, there was a French researcher that indicated that the clitoris was much larger, but through religion and politics and all those things, it got lost.
Wow.
And then we rediscovered it really in the late 90s, and then it was first published in the early 2000s. So what does that tell you?
Oh, yeah.
Are you looking for a community focused on making holistic health and wellness the mainstream choice for health instead of the sick pill-popping solutions those other guys are always pushing? At the Holistic Business Network, we're focused on bringing holistic health and wellness businesses like yours to the top of everyone's minds, even when they're not feeling their best or just want to feel better than they already do. Our community is focused on holistic health getting to the masses, to make sure you're doing all of the right things in your business to become more visible to the people who desperately need you. Check the links in our description to see how our visibility analyzer rates your business's ability to reach your target audience. In just a few simple questions, we'll be able to see why you're not reaching the people who need you and how you can reach more. I guarantee these couple of questions are going to shift the way you think about visibility and completely change the trajectory of your holistic health and wellness business. It's time for businesses like yours to take their rightful place and heal the world. Now let's get back to the message.
That's why the sex education you said was so limited, because we didn't even have the full information.
Yeah. And that our pleasure as women have been completely disregarded.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If we think about all of the messages that we've received around sex and sexuality as women, right? It's full of duty and responsibility, right? Like, it's my job to please my man, and I have to be of service, and I have to show up for them. Right.
Yeah.
And so then that completely disregards my ability to really enjoy the experience, because then it's not about me. Right. It's about them. And so then how do I navigate that? Right.
Yeah.
And if I'm not enjoying the sex that I'm having, then I'm not going to want it. Right. And that is the foundation.
Because you feel like it's a duty now, and it's not enjoyable.
And a chore and a responsibility. And again, our sexual self is completely different than the rest of our being, right? Our sexual self thrives off of curiosity, mystery, adventure, sometimes the pushing of boundaries, right? And when we think about other areas of our life, of our health, right, and wellness, and our family and our children, they need consistency, routine, and structure, right? Which is the complete opposite of what our sexual self needs to thrive. So if we're not knowledgeable of that, and we're not creating space for this other part of us to kind of emerge, then we're not really going to be having the most maybe optimal or satisfying or pleasurable sexual experiences. And therefore we kind of push away from it.
Oh, this is so good.
Yeah.
Guys, I feel like she's like lifting weights off of, like, this is amazing.
Yes.
All of us in relationships and wanting to navigate our relationships better.
Yes.
This is a key component.
It's
like,
so important.
you have said so much in such a short time that is so good. So I could just imagine sessions with you, with couples, how you are really helping to open their eyes to the nuances of being in a relationship and what intimacy really is. Because you're right. A lot of times we just, relate that word to sex, and that's all. So, okay.
Yeah.
So this is so good.
And there's so much more, Michelle. What else do you want to know?
What else do you want to tell me? Because I am just like, I feel like I just drink out of the fire hydrant. It's so good. So much good stuff.
Yes.
So what are some other key things that you realize that you're, once you educate on the pleasure points for the women?
So this is the anatomy, right? So this is our body. What do we need to pay attention to, right? But then we also have to understand what's going on in our minds and how that's affecting us, right? Like I said, we have so many beliefs about, how we're supposed to show up or how we're supposed to look and what we're supposed to be doing and all of those types of things. And when we let our mind have all of that chatter, it pulls us out of the moment.
It does.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not able to be present and really in that moment with our partner, then we're probably missing a lot of the pleasure and connection that's available. Right. And so we really have to take into consideration that there's a distinct difference between desire and arousal. And we often kind of link those two together in our society, especially when we don't have the education of understanding the difference, right? So desire tends to be our mental, emotional wanting of sex, and arousal tends to be our physical, physiological response to a sexual stimuli, right? We can have one without the other, and we can have one before the other. So one without the other indicates a little bit of a disconnect between our minds and our bodies, right? And this can happen for a lot of different reasons. As we age, naturally, our bodies are slowing down, our hormones are changing, right? And so we might want it, but then our bodies just isn't responding in that way, right? Or in the way that we're used to. And then the other way around, unfortunately, we see this a lot when it comes to sexual trauma, which is also a significant part of my work. It's the other side of the coin that, you know, is that that place that we really have to work through. But then again, that liberation on the other end, that empowerment on the other end, that reclaiming your body, right? And so in those cases, when we're talking about the arousal, right, our bodies might be responding, but we don't want it. So that's why we feel betrayed by our bodies. So it creates that little bit of a disconnect as well. Yeah. And so when we understand that there are two distinct differences and one becomes before the other, that indicates our desire style. Yeah. And in our society, unfortunately, we're only shown one style in our movies and our music and, you know, media. What we're shown is what we call spontaneous desire. And spontaneous desire is when we have the mental, emotional wanting of sex first, and then our bodies respond very quickly thereafter. Yeah. So these are the people that tend to have sex on the forefront of their mind. So these are the people that tend to initiate sex more often. However, this is only about half of people. The other half of people experience the exact opposite, and we call it responsive desire, meaning we are responding to a moment or an experience, right? So these people need the physical, physiological arousal first, and then the mental, emotional wanting of sex comes after. So these are the people that aren't initiating sex because it's just not on the forefront of their mind. It's just not the way that they're wired, right? But these are the people that either during sex or after sex say, oh, wow, that was great. I don't know why I don't want that more often, right? And you don't know why because you don't know there's a distinctly different style of desire that nobody's told you about.
Oh my
So goodness. We don't know how to work with it, right? And so this is so much of my work, helping people understand their sexual self, how they operate fundamentally from a personal level, but then also how our sexuality works in general.
Oh my goodness, guys. This was jam-packed.
Yes.
With so much great information. I am seeing like relationship and sexual intimacy and all the things so differently right now. Okay, Rachel, you have to tell us how we can get in contact with you. Because we could talk all day.
We could.
Seriously, we could talk all day. But I want you guys, if you are seeing that there's something that you can do to improve your relationship and have that connection, connect with Rachel. She is a wealth. As you could hear right now, I'm like, oh, my hair is flying back. It's amazing. Yeah. Please tell us how we can get in contact with you.
Okay. My website is infiniteintimacytherapy.com. On my website, you can find a few courses that I've created for women, one for women in general, and it's called Sensual Women. It's a self-guided course. And then I also have a course for moms called Sensual Mamas because, you know, once our bodies are then used as a vessel and then we get disconnected and then we got to reclaim and, you know, all of that beautiful stuff. So those two courses, I'm so proud of them, especially the workbooks that's associated with it, because if you're not able to work with me in person, right, then this workbook really helps as a guide. I have a whole bunch of questions where you can self-reflect and really allow yourself to kind of work through your sexuality in a different way. And so for participants today, I've created also a little code for 30% off of the course courses, and you can use the word relief, all caps, for 30% off of those courses. And then on social media, Infinite Intimacy Therapy are my handles, Instagram, Facebook. I'm dipping my toe into TikTok, but not quite, not quite there yet. That's a
They
whole
would
other-
love you on TikTok. Oh my goodness, you're going to go viral. I will say, follow her on Instagram. You share so much great information, Rachel, on Instagram. I mean, I've already learned so much from you, and I continue to learn. And this is such a topic that we need to hear more about.
And I try to bring a lightness to it, right? Because this topic can be so heavy, right? Like I said, so full of shame, and we got to breathe through that. And once we're able to kind of let go of all of those myths and misconceptions and find ourselves, our own thoughts, our own bodies, it's just, I'm telling you, infinite possibility.